start with today's lecture. So, but see, that is, we are going to talk about that because after we talk about the Cold War, we're going to talk about the war on drugs, because the war on drugs is going to have a lot to do with domestic and foreign policy in the United States, right? I mean, they eat like a lot of stuff. So we ended off last time, America entered World War II because the Japanese were so worried that we were going to jump into war anyways. They thought that they could just cut us off at the source and totally prevent our will to fight. But they kind of underestimated us. Yes.
We didn't end on that slide.
We didn't.
We ended further.
Much further.
We ended on, wait, no, we went too far. One more, back. That's the one.
There we go.
Okay, yeah. So Americans responded by joining recruiting offices and getting in en masse. But if you'll recall, people of Italian, German, and especially Japanese descent, and some of these people have been in America for a few generations, were put into internment camps.
Wait, I didn't write the last one.
You didn't get that?
What did I write?
Just what? Oh,
Japanese and German.
yeah. So now similar things to this had happened before in, say, the Civil War. So in the Civil War, like here in Texas, there were people who were, of like northerners, like coming from the north, who recently came over, were persecuted in some ways, especially like people more in the European parts of Texas, like down around San Antonio and stuff like that. In World War I, people of German descent often had their businesses vandalized, or they might get beat up in the streets. But it was more a part of the system here in World War II. We just had federal government essentially evict people out of their homes and put them inside military camps. And so, such as this place right here, there were several of these in Texas, actually. So here we see, it's kind of like a little Boy Scout brigade. See, they're wearing the Boy Scout uniforms. People were drawn up into formation so that they could be counted. They had schools, they had little jobs they would have them do,
So
such
that
as.
is terrible.
Yeah, I mean, like it
But they
wasn't
just
like.
couldn't leave.
Yeah, they couldn't leave. So like for like your rights though, from that standpoint, it's scary because if they can do that to them, they can do that to anyone. Precedent has been set. The Supreme Court upheld it, which means that one day, if the federal government chose to, they could put people in camps again, which is kind of a bad thing if you think about it. But yeah, it was humane. So that was good. And people were given work. But a lot of these people were business owners and they lost it all. So in California, Japanese Americans were fired from all state jobs and had their law and medical license revoked. So while the federal government was doing this, other private or state entities were just like, oh, heck no, we're cutting you off. So keep this in mind. It was the Japanese, it was Japanese Americans in World War II. But you could see this happening to other groups because of their backgrounds as well in the future. So it's another bad precedent. You don't want these kind of things because what if one day you're part of a group that's targeted?
Right.
Banks froze assets. So banks were like, sorry, we're keeping your money. Stores refused them service. And homes and businesses were vandalized, often with bricks, sometimes through arson.
But stores and banks just can't be like, oh.
But they could. Private businesses have the right to
Government.
refuse people service. But the thing is, if they freeze your assets, they're like, well, who's going to enforce the law? Who were the cops on the side of? Were they on the side of the folks who look like the people who attacked America? Or are they on the side of the people who helped them out with their bank accounts? Well, often they might choose the people who give them a little favor. Corruption, unfortunately, isn't something that we're immune from, even in our country here. In 1942, FDR signed Executive Order 9066, forcing 110,000 Japanese Americans into 10 internment camps. This order was upheld as constitutional in the Supreme Court case Korematsu versus the United States in 1944. However, this done away with anti-business attitudes that overtook the country during the Great Depression. So this is like, so you have it here, the Supreme Court is upholding this. Especially in Los Angeles, there was a very large section of Los Angeles that was called Japanese Town, right? So you had a lot of Japanese people with movie theaters, their own businesses, banks, manufacturing, things like that. During the war, while they were put in internment camps, the city ignored all claims to property ownership in this area. So a lot of people from the ghetto parts of LA moved in and took over these businesses and these homes. Eventually, when these folks are let out of the internment camps after the war, they're going to find people are squatting in their homes, but the city refused to give them back. And all of these people had to accept that their homes were gone, their businesses, and they got no recruitment. They got nothing back out of it. So it's pretty sad. And now it's my understanding, I forgot the name of it, it's like one of the more worst parts of LA. So thanks for that.
So the done away with anti-business sentiment.
Yeah, so that's like skipping, that's my bad. It's skipping to it like essentially like a new chapter, right? So the war had done away with anti-business attitudes. So remember, like in the Great Depression, a lot of people, we didn't really talk about this, I guess, but a lot of people were very anti-business because they blamed businesses for doing things like not giving them work, not paying them good wages. But during World War II, all of a sudden, a lot of businesses are doing a lot of things that seem very patriotic. They're building war supplies. They're expanding. They're making a lot of work for Americans who are here at home. During the war, the U.S. paid more than $240 billion in defense contracts. 82% went to the top 100 corporations. So it's during World War II that we see the growth of what we think of big time war business. A lot of big war industries are really going to grow from the Second World War, and they're going to stay big all through the Cold War. And it's going to be kind of like a self-perpetuating business. Even when there is no war going on, it's still able to accrue a lot of cash, but at the same time provide some folks with good jobs. I mean, like really, some of the best paying jobs you can get with the best benefits and retirements are for defense contracting work, really. You can get a job, somebody who makes like missiles, munitions, aircraft, and stuff like that for the military. It's hard work. It's hard work from guys that have done it. You work a lot of crazy hours, but some people, they can do that and retire in like 10 years and they're good for the rest of their life if you do the right job. So there's some jobs like that in the oil business too. You work crazy hours, you work 80-hour weeks. You bust yourself for 10 years, and next thing you know, you're able to retire for life. You know, so.
How many hours?
Well, let's think about how many in a day. It's 24. It's 24 times 7. Come on now.
I can't do the number.
148?
Okay, so let's say 148. So yeah, I mean, you got to think about it this way. Like a normal work week is 40 hours, right? So think about that times 2. Huh? Yeah, no, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough. If you join the service, you find yourself doing that anyways, basically. A lot of times you might work 12-hour days, 16-hour days, 72-hour day, or just happens, you know. So, but that's why we only make the young do it. So, all right, moving on. Hey, there we go.
What is that?
Well, those are tanks. Wouldn't you want one of those? All right.
Whoa, those are tanks?
Yeah, those are little bitty Shermans. Wait, are those Shermans? Wait, I don't remember what World War II tanks are. Maybe. All right, so
Those tires.
those are treads rolled up. See, they're like here. They just kind of like a little belt. They just kind of wrap them up. So, yeah. So remember, tanks were and airplanes played a part in World War One, but in World War II, they've been so improved upon. And of course, we were watching what the rest of the world was doing with these things and learning from them, even our enemies, which is a very smart thing to do. It's better to learn from your enemies than your friends when it comes to warfare, because, well, you know, hopefully you're not going to fight your friends. America enters the war home front. Wartime industries helped modernize much of rural America as industry increased by 40% in the South and even more so in the West. So yeah, you're going to see lots of factories. Factories so big, they build cities around them in order to make like airplanes and tanks, battleships, stuff like that. Like this is going to really, really, really make California rich. Like it was already doing well because of things like Hollywood, and its agriculture was doing well. But the wartime industries that are going to open up on the West Coast are going to be huge. By the end of the war, the U.S. had manufactured over 86,000 warships, 88,000 tanks, and 300,000 planes. Research and development, R&D projects, universities, and even communities were funded to aid in the war effort. So remember, this is a war of science. So people are getting research contracts to try to develop new ways to find enemies, to communicate with friends, to protect troops, to kill the enemy, to feed people, to ward off bugs, like a whole bunch of things. I'll talk more about that later.
Wait, if battleships took so long to build, like a year or two, why'd they build them?
Why?
Like,
Because they were
wasn't,
epic and they
what-
were,
wasn't the war like almost over by the time?
It could be, but the thing is like they're going to speed up the process a whole lot in the war, right? And so they're going to have just armies of guys there welding, piecing these things together.
so they get to make them a lot faster.
Yeah, so they really expedite the process. And one thing about having them is that that's how warfare was fought. You had to get your troops to land. You have to hold land. Battleships are very important because they're portable pieces of artillery, and they can also protect the other ships, such as aircraft carriers. And when you have those things, you have air, sea, and land power, especially in the Pacific, where we're going island hopping. And these islands are so small that these giant battleship cannons can totally decimate every square inch of them. So that our troops have a safer time trying to go in and take out entrenched, dug in machine gun and artillery protected Japanese soldiers. And the aircraft are important as well because you can only do so much with anti-aircraft as far as protection. And aircraft can do very, very precision bombings and things like that too against your opponents. You want to use as many pieces of the puzzle as possible. All right, so radar for air power mostly to detect airplanes. Sonar, which is used to detect submarines and also boats in the water. Penicillin, which is a very good antibacterial thing. DDT, which is a pesticide, which is very, very safe for human beings. But later on, they're going to find it's actually very bad for birds. That's why it's illegal in the U.S. today. And new medical procedures were some of the examples of breakthroughs made by the scientific community during the war. Now, like DDT, it's it was actually hailed as one of the most life-saving products of the 20th century. It is super, super effective at killing insects.
Why was that life-saving?
Well, by killing insects in Africa, for example, for periods of time, they totally eradicated malaria and totally got rid of locusts that were eating crops, for example. And malaria is one of the leading causes of death throughout the third world. And of course, here in the United States, people used it left and right for farms and front yards. But it was so effective that people said it made the nighttime in their neighborhoods way too quiet. because now all of a sudden none of the crickets are chirping. There's no buzzing in your ear from mosquitoes and stuff like that. Super effective. But it wound up killing off a lot of things like through starvation, frogs and other animals that eat bugs,
That's not good.
and apex predators such as eagles and things like that because they're so high up the food chain.
Yeah, a lot of them, I'm sorry. no.
Yeah, they would get abundant source of DDT in their systems, and it was found that it wouldn't hurt eagles and birds, but it would make their eggshells so thin that they would just break from like the weight of the bird sitting on them to nest, and so like a lot of birds started getting endangered because their eggs were so like they just couldn't reproduce eggs. Mama bird would sit on the eggs and then oops. So yeah, can't have any birds like that. Yeah.
I think that's why like almost all of the birds of prey are endangered. Like the ones that are,
Mm-hmm.
is because they had such severe population loss when they were using DDT.
I think a lot of it is, and of course, some of it is people who like get rid of habitats and stuff. A few years before me and my wife moved into our current home, it was our uncle's home, and he has pictures of when he had bald eagles live across the highway from where we live. Of course, when we moved there, it's like just like vultures every now and then. That's about it. So, but yeah, it's pretty cool. He's got pictures of like this tree that's across from our highway, and it had a bald eagle's nest. I wish it was there. That'd be really cool to have a bald eagle right there. I try to wait for feathers to fall. Bald eagle feathers. All right, so higher taxes paid for half of the war, while the national debt went from $40 billion to $260 billion by 1945. So we did a massive amount of spending. And remember, we already did a lot of spending too by giving our allies lots and lots of cash. So growth of national debt. So here's some, I don't know if you call it propaganda photos, but they're photos calling for people to have personal action to help out with the war effort. So.
Dig on for victory.
So yeah, it's about things like victory gardens. It's about rationing. It's about preserving your own food, and doing what you can so that by consuming less out of the market, there's more for the war effort, right? So that's a big thing here. I think I've told you before, my wife's great grandmother, she was in, she graduated high school when the war started, and then she went to TJC, and one of her jobs was she was a ration card girl. And so whenever you would get cards saying how much of something you could get per week or per month, like how much meat or rubber or certain other gasoline and other items, you got a little stamp on it whenever you got those items. So she would manage these things for a lot of Tyler. And so this was an effort all across the country by people using less. The idea is that there would be more for the soldiers. In 1944, FDR would win his fourth presidential term with Harry S. Truman as his vice president. Meanwhile, though the economy was doing much better due to wartime economy, many efforts were made to help out with the war. And that's one of the big differences between wars we have today and wars we had back then.
He was almost a dictator.
Yeah, how many terms did he win?
Oh, it's four. He's not going to be after this, and Truman's going to be president after.
So my question is,
Uh-huh.
could he have what stopped him from running a fifth term?
Did I?
Oh, he died?
Yeah.
So he could have just been president he was president his whole life.
Yeah, he could have been president as long as he wanted to. He was wildly popular here in America. That he was doing too much with the federal government. People thought he was growing the powers too much at times. But
He essentially was dictator until he died.
yeah, I
Not
mean,
dictator, but
well, at first he could have done anything he wanted to, right? So like the legislature and Supreme Court usually, and like eventually the Supreme Court's gonna be on his side. But yeah, I mean, kinda in many ways you could say that. That's going to be why we'll talk about it later, we're going to institute a constitutional amendment limiting down to 2 terms. All right, so, like, that's one of the difference between, like, the wars we have today, like, we're in Afghanistan right now, right? But nobody rations. So part of it is we do it more on credit now than we used to. So we break up more debt than we used to, even though that was a lot of debt back then, yeah.
There's no way that a president could get rid of the 2-term thing, could he?
No, it had to be through constitutional amendment. My question is, what I don't know, is if you could be president by,
Yeah.
well, yeah, like if you're vice president, president dies, if you can run twice after that. My guess is no.
If you're vice president,
Yeah, let's say if I'm vice president, president dies, now I'm president. Can I run 2 more times, or does this count as one of them? So that's what I don't know. You'd have to look at the language. But, I mean, I don't know. So government agencies control prices, rents, and wages. Remember, this is something that they were trying to push before the war. But now, due to wartime measures, they're able to do that. So the price of certain commodities, such as food, how much rent. So they're able to put in essentially a ceiling for how much rent you can pay for like living in the city. But also things like wages, things like minimum wage are introduced. Many products made of metal, silk, cotton, rubber, and those that used gasoline became more scarce. So why do you think silk?
underwear.
No, it's for parachutes. They had to parachute a lot of supplies, and they had parachutes for pilots and paratroopers and stuff like that. And even would parachute in vehicles like Jeeps and stuff.
They could make parachutes big enough for those?
Yes, they can. I mean, we parachute Humvees and stuff like that today, big pallets of junk. And they keep trying to develop parachutable like armor vehicles and stuff, but they're so heavy. By the time they hit the ground, they come so fast they kind of get broken. Well, even sometimes when they parachute smaller vehicles, they break. So it's always hit or miss. By 1942, most Americans had ration books, which limited the amount of sugar, meat, gas, and other products for each person. Families across the country were encouraged to collect rubber, paper, and metals so they could be recycled for the troops. So people were encouraged, kids were encouraged to help out with all this. It was like a national effort, right? Who left this Chromebook over here? Is that yours? Okay. You okay, Joseph?
Okay.
Good, because we're moving right along. All right, let's see, I think this is,
Wait, can you go back to the 5 seconds?
1,000.
Okay, I'm good.
All right. So the war is going to expand a lot of work opportunities, of course, for women. A lot of nice paying factory jobs for Of course, also like African Americans as well, though they still were paid less. It's still going to be a lot better than other things that they were doing. So let's see a little bit about this expansion. As many as 10 million white men joined the service. Minorities and women found new roles opening up for them. And so that was the old makeup of the workforce, right? But since they're going off to the war, there's a lot of seats to fill in at the factories and stuff like that. Serving in non-frontline roles, so that means they're not supposed to be out there killing Nazis and stuff like that. Over 350,000 women had joined the military with the same ranks and pay as their male counterparts. So, a private and a lieutenant, regardless whether you're male or female, are supposed to make the same cash. Many employers found themselves recruiting women for manufacturing positions that were male only in the past. And we saw some of this in World War I. I mean, it's like this in every war when you think about it. Back in the Civil War, almost everybody was into agriculture. Well, here in like East Texas during the Civil War, East Texas was basically depopulated of men. Almost all of them joined the Confederate Army. So that left just the women and children to do all the farming work. So this is something that it's new, but now it's in the industry for wages. In 1944, around 37% of women were now working and earning more wages than ever before. At the beginning of the war, African Americans were not allowed to serve with white troops, and they were barred from many wartime jobs. FDR resisted integration, but circumstances changed his mind, and that circumstance will be the Battle of the Bulge. We'll talk about that later. That battle is going to be so devastating to the American forces, it's going to leave a vacuum of soldiers. And so FDR is going to have to integrate African American, Hispanic American, Asian Americans, and white Americans all together in the forces. So
What was the Battle of the Bulge?
it's going to be in Germany against the Germans. It's going to be a massive, massive surprise attack in winter. And Americans were advancing, and the Nazis got the best of them. They kind of like attacked them faster than they thought they would, and like totally killed a whole lot of Americans there.
Yeah, killing America. I hate when people kill Americans.
As you should.
Only Americans.
What?
No, I'm joking.
Yeah, let's not go too far now. It's not a zero-sum game. Like if you're losing, I'm winning. You know, everybody can be okay, and we can be happy about that.
So before this time, was the army only white men?
No. There were black troops, but they were segregated. They were in their own units, and often they had now they could have their own officers in charge of them, right? But sometimes it was white officers in charge of them as well. And it's not going to be standard across all units. There's going to be some units that are going to stay segregated. Like story of the first black paratroopers. They weren't allowed to like go overseas. They actually kept them home to be the first pararescue jumpers. Not pararescue. What am I thinking of? Smoke jumpers. That's it. Like they'll and it's still around today actually. Like along the West Coast, they're like firefighters who have to parachute in to like forest fires and put it out. I had a roommate who really wanted to do that. He was from Lake Tahoe. He never went around doing it. Yeah, they have to jumping into trees is dangerous. They have to bring in a lot of rope. They got to bring in like a cage to protect their face and a helmet, and because they'll like land in these tall trees, get bounced around, and then they have to like basically like rope themselves back down And then from there, they're like chopping down trees and digging ditches to try to make fire breaks, to keep like the fires like channeled. It's tough work. It's tough work. Sometimes they land in the wrong spot, or the fire moves in a way they can't predict, and they get burnt to death. So it's very sad. You ready to move to the next part?
Almost.
Almost. It's good to do things like controlled burns, though, where you can. One of my neighbors did one recently, and I was very proud of him. It's pretty good.
How do you do a controlled burn?
Look, there's different ways to do it. You can actually ask the local forestry department; they'll help you do it. But like honestly, they'll just bring a little torch and they'll just start burning underbrush in spots. Some people, what they'll do is take like a chainsaw and stuff like that, just cut down all the little trees, like in a forest or behind your property, pile up and then burn them. So there's different ways you can do it. But you just want to do it little spots at a time. Hey, what do you know? Smoke jumpers right there. See, yeah, they're wearing little cage helmets. They got the rope, so when they inevitably get stuck in trees, they climb down. I don't see their equipment on the side. There should be like a little axe and all the shovel and all that stuff. Yeah, it's tough work. It's tough work. So, all right. So, though African Americans were now able to work in these wartime industries, segregation and discrimination were still facts of life. For wages in the factories, they only made 65% of those of white coworkers. Prior to 1940, blacks could only serve in the lowest ranks and most manual jobs in the service. The Army Air Corps, which was the Air Force back then, and the Marines banned African Americans outright. As the war dragged on, black soldiers and sailors were allowed to gain rank as both non-commissioned and commissioned officers. So non-commissioned officers are like sergeants. Commissioned officers can be anywhere from like a lieutenant up to a general. African Americans would eventually be allowed into most positions with some limitations as pilots and paratroopers. So integration is happening slowly. A lot of military bases, though, still had like they would have like the even parts on the base where black soldiers could go and white soldiers could go, but it depended on what state they were in. If they were in a state that had segregation, like Georgia, the military base would have separate restrooms, separate clubs, and things like that. But if it was military up north, they didn't. So it always abided by the local laws. It'd be the same for the buses. So like people would have to ride in the back of the bus if it was in the south, but not in the north, not in the military. So,
Even on a military base.
now, like Asians and Hispanics had this problem too, but they didn't have to be segregated. They were still discriminated, but they didn't have quite the rules in place like this, though there was a lot of bias against them sometimes.
Smoke jumpers probably wasn't smoke jumpers probably being a smoke jumper probably wasn't the most glamorous of jobs.
It wasn't. It's funny you mention it. I read a book, and about a third of the book was about the smoke jumpers about this time last year. And yeah, it was firsthand accounts of people who did it. And no, they weren't very happy about it because they wanted to go fight Hitler. They wanted to go like the other soldiers did. And so they were happy to do something, and they served the role proudly, right? But yeah, it's what they were looking to do. They did manage to put out quite a few fires, though, that were started by Japanese pyro balloons, like pyrotechnic balloons. They were sent over to kind of burn
Why did they
cities
do
and
that?
stuff.
They were just like, oh yeah, burn the place. It's fine.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. I mean, if you're at total war, if you're attacking civilian populations, which they did all throughout the war, throughout Asia.
So how long would these pyrotechnic balloons float for?
I don't know. But they release them off the coast. They go, whoop, whoop, and then when they eventually come down to Earth,
Coast of Japan?
I don't know, they bring boats in.
Oh. They come all the way to the California coast?
Mhm.
Didn't we have any like boats over there to stop them?
Oh, yeah. And there's a whole volunteer force all up and down civilians watching the coast with binoculars. Even had like anti-air gun machine guns and stuff like that, and artillery. But you just couldn't always find these things. It's one of the reasons why they never like tried to make an invasion. But I don't think Japan never thought about invading America. I don't think they just don't have the population basis
Do you
for it.
think Hitler did?
Hitler was, from my understanding, it was more like a super grand way in the future kind of idea, right? He's like, after I take care of the rest of the world, then I can go over there type of thing. But even then, because his whole idea of his dream society was essentially to have the Germans kind of spread throughout the world, ruling over their little fiefdoms of what they considered lesser races to do all the work for them. So, just so you know.
How would they have little lesser races if they killed them?
Well, they wanted to enslave everyone and then practice eugenics from there. Hey, so here we go. Once again, we have President Eisenhower talking to, gosh, I can't see what that is. Oh, that's great. Okay, 101st Airborne. So once again, the paratroopers, they're getting ready for D-Day invasion. So he's got a little camo paint. He wants to get rid of that hard edges on the helmet. It might look dumb, but it's when you're doing camouflage, it's not so much always about color, but also you want to keep mindful of shape as well. Kind of break up unnatural outlines. All right, so America enters the war, finally. The Americans wanted to strike back at Japan while fighting a two-front war. A lot of this had to do with Churchill was very strongly influencing us here at home. American war planners wanted to immediately invade from England across the channel. However, Churchill said that the British were not ready and asked America to help the Allies in Africa. So one of the reasons for that is England got a lot of their war supplies traditionally from their holdings in Africa, oil and stuff like that. And they were facing a devastating loss against the German General Rommel in Africa. Roosevelt supported Churchill and told the military to help free up North Africa in what was known as Operation Torch. The commander for American forces in Europe and North Africa was Dwight D. Eisenhower. Though the focus was fighting Germany and Italy, our first victory would be in the Pacific. So
I've heard Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was tough.
that's right. If you win a big war, you get to be a president. That's kind of how it works sometimes. So, yeah, so our American war planners just wanted to go ahead, just take out Germany as fast as possible. England was like, we need to take a slower approach. And some historians blame Churchill. No, he's one of our strongest allies. They're like, well, he might have been our strongest ally, but at the same time, he convinced us to do things that may have endangered U.S. troops to protect English troops at times. And they think this might have been one of those cases. So, but that's just one of those little things historians argue over. But yeah, North Africa is going to be a lot of. This is where we're going to have U.S. Army Rangers in particular do a lot of night raids and things like that. They're very famous for, like, especially like the Italians helped the Germans hold a lot of North Africa. So a lot of times the Rangers would come in armed with only knives, and they would climb into these little fortresses and just basically take out most of the like Italian troops with just knives alone, and then sneak back out. So a lot of really close, brutal fighting.
They just like go in and like stab them away.
Yeah, because a lot of what Rangers trained for were things like rock face climbing, mountaineering, and stuff like that. Moving around in the night without night vision and modern tools like that, sneaking and getting out really quickly. A lot of hand-to-hand combat. So they're commandos. You know, it's like so yeah, we do a lot of that. But it was brutal. It was no prisoners. So even if somebody was alive, you couldn't leave them alive, because if you left them alive, they would give intel to the enemy. So
Hey, there's these guys going in the night.
yeah, so despite we tried to be very humane in the war, there's a lot of operations where we're just like, sorry, no prisoners. You're holding your hands up. We still gotta shoot you. No. Pretty brutal. That sounds like war. What was the name of that book I read last year? I remember so many of the stories, but I don't remember the title. Gosh. It's somewhere. Oh, I didn't bring it here. I don't see it here. Yeah, I don't have it. It's that book.
Same.
Let's see. I'm almost there yet. I think, okay. Okay, we got 2 more slides to get to where I planned on stopping today. Just 2. And then we'll be done for the new year.
When do we leave this class, sir?
25 after. Now we're gonna leave a little early on Wednesday because I got to a meeting. So,
Yes, sir.
well, I'm gonna try to do it virtually, but still, like,
What's the meeting about? sir?
a student
Um,
with confidential rights and stuff.
okay.
Don't worry, nobody's in trouble. All right, we ready to move on? All right.
I thought it was like a staff meeting.
Hey, why do you think all that smoke's in the air?
Bombs.
Yeah, that's called it's called flak.
Yeah.
So it's whenever you fire a projectile in the air, it explodes and shrapnel all around it. Because tracking and hitting a fast moving object like an airplane is very, very hard.
But if you just shatter their windshield and go
Yeah.
into there.
They're fragile. They're very fragile. Take out their fuel, their wings just enough. The little cables that are controlling
Things over.
flappers or whatever, engines. Yeah, the very, very soft skin pilot, all that stuff. And next thing you know, the airplane's gone.
The soft skin pilot.
They are. I mean, projectiles don't really do well in a human body.
Is it like that one map on Flag?
Well, all right. But here you see this ship's been hit too. So it's like, this is like all out warfare. So you got ships firing at ships. You could have submarines. You could have
Is that where a bomb hit in the?
that or a plane went down.
It looks like a tree, like in the middle of the
Yeah.
It does.
So there's this plane. It's just like going around, and he knows everywhere there's black, there is unseen just shrapnel going in all directions. Of course, they're firing at machine guns. You could have other planes trying to track you and shoot you down. So it was like all out battle. And the people on the ship know that if they get hit wrong just one time, they're all shark food. So it's
Oh.
bad. Hmm?
Same for here.
That's true. That's true. So America enters the war, the Pacific. Our first victory was on the Pacific Ocean in May of 1942 at the Battle of Coral Sea. U.S. forces deciphered Japanese secret communications and prevented an invasion of New Guinea. Though we lost an aircraft carrier known as the Lexington, the Imperial Navy was halted. Using many of the same methods, this success happened in June at the Battle of Midway, which was a massive naval victory for the United States. We managed to turn the war around in the Pacific after this.
How does war happen in the ocean?
That's the thing. I've never been a naval warfare guy, but I do know this. Often you have the fleets; they have a general idea of where they want to go, and they're spending a lot of time trying to track each other. They don't know where the other fleet is.
So it's like Battleship.
Yeah, it's like cat and mouse. They're searching for one another.
Yeah, it's like the game Battleship.
I guess so. Yeah, you're just putting the peg in, guessing.
Except it's like Battleship, but you have an idea of where they are.
More or less, and that's why they'll have like planes up in the air to try to going away from the carriers within a radius, trying to track and then radio back in where the enemy's found. Huh?
Have you ever played Captain Soda?
No, but I have played Battleship.
It's like there's like 4 people. There's an engineer. There's the navigator. There's the captain, and everybody has like different jobs.
Mhm.
And you're on this big like map, and it's like Battleship but way harder because you're talking with 4 people, and you're telling the other person. There's this mode called live mode. It's
Mhm.
usually it's like turn based, but you can just move at whatever pace you want to.
Mhm.
Use your weapons at whatever pace you want to, and just like your translator has to like track where he thinks they're going
Mhm.
on like his pad. He can shift around to see like where it fits in.
Sounds done.
And you have to resurface to go back to places. And when you resurface, you have to like say what quadrant you're in.
Huh.
9 of them. It's crazy.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds tough. I honestly haven't played the board game in years. I'm not gonna lie.
Board games are cool.
My wife keeps trying to make me do it. Order. All right. I keep trying to get her to play Monopoly, but she didn't want to do it. She said, "Takes too long." Yeah,
I don't like Monopoly.
just get some popcorn and take a nap. All right. Moving right along. So Midway changed the course of the war in the Pacific theater as American dive bombers devastated Japanese aircraft carriers. So we used the power of our mobile air fighters from our aircraft carriers to outmaneuver theirs and take out their aircraft carriers. So you're taking away essentially airports, military airports out on the sea. Due to America's population and industry, we were able to construct and man over twice as many aircraft carriers than the Japanese. We have a lot more access to oil, which was going to be very devastating for the Japanese because they're going to have a severe oil shortage. It's have a lot less people and resources. I mean, it's like a battle of economics. Got one more after this. All right, so the last one of the day. And here is America's premier naval commander, Charles Nimitz, and he is going to be the brain behind our successful victories. He's also going to help come up with something we call island hopping, which is going to help us defeat the Japanese. General Douglas MacArthur, who was the Army of the Pacific Front, you remember he was the guy who was in the Philippines. He gave up that piece of land, and a lot of American troops, however, were very mad when he fled. He swore he would return, but the Americans were defeated and put into prisoner of war camps. Many of them were starved and tortured and murdered. So it's very hard to be in a Japanese POW camp. So MacArthur would use the army to make an offensive from New Guinea to the Philippines from the south. So he was trying to get it back. And, well, I'm sorry, it was Chester Nimitz would take certain islands in Solomon, Gilbert, Mariana, and Marshall Islands as they approached the Philippines from the east. So this is two different fronts. So you have the Army and the Navy going from the south, and you have the Navy and the Marines coming from the east. Both were to link up and eventually attack Japan together. By August of 1942, the Marines shored up the Guadalcanal Islands and the Solomon Islands. The Japanese fought intensely in this months-long siege as they believed this would determine who would win the war. Both sides had terrible casualties, though the Americans lost many less and won the island. So we'll talk about island hopping. Often these islands were desert islands. There was like nothing on them, or they might have a small patch of jungle. And the Japanese would build these underground fortresses that we could just shell over and over and over, and it would have little effect against them. We totally like kill all the wildlife, all the vegetation on these islands, but the Japanese soldiers would still be okay. And so whenever our troops would do landings to take these things, they would take in a whole lot of machine gun and artillery fire, totally devastating. Like the Marines or the soldiers who were landing. The fights and lots of casualties to take machine gun nests and things like that. So this is where we're going to see the flamethrower is going to be put to use, to where soldiers get close enough to shoot a flamethrower into these bunkers and these machine gun nests to totally fry out the enemy. The Marines and the soldiers are going to find that the Japanese, they don't surrender. They'll take a whole island and only 3 Japanese out of a couple of thousand would surrender. The rest were willing to fight.